What's up, everybody? Today, we're going to be learning about or taking a look at Svelte 5. Now that it's in its release candidate stage, and I feel much more confident that the APIs are stable, I want to make some videos on it. So the goal here, this is something new for my channel. I don't think I've done something like this before. But what I want to do is I want us to start off with some basic markup here and implement the functionality needed, at least the UI part, the front end part. We're not going full stack here, needed to make this web page functional. So if we look here, we just have a bunch of products. It looks like a lot of makeup. I know I'm using a dummy JSON API to get all this product data, but we can see here that we're just rendering out a bunch of different products. We have a cart here with a placeholder product, the ability to increment and decrement quantities here, remove. So we have a bunch of different features here that we can actually implement, all of which will rely on Svelte 5's new APIs, the reactivity APIs. So I thought this would be a cool little challenge. If you want to just go ahead and do it yourself, I'll leave a link to the starting code down at the bottom. But if you want to see how I would handle some of these things, feel free to hang out. All right, so let's take a look at what code we're starting out with here. Again, this is mostly the only part of JavaScript that's in here is this each block in Svelte that we're iterating over the products in. The rest of this is just Tailwind and HTML, a couple of different icons, nothing too fancy, but I didn't want to bore you with trying to build all this out and make it look half decent during this video, as I want to focus on the reactivity piece, the JavaScript piece, the Svelte piece. So just to give a quick tour, we have a page.ts file where we're loading data from this dummy JSON API. We're then returning those products here from the load function. Now I went ahead and made a type for the product. I know it looks really complex. That's just what gets returned back from the API. We're not actually going to use all of these. However, we might in a future video do some things with tags or filters and stuff like that. But for this video, we're just focusing on a couple of these properties. So don't look too far into this at this point in time. So in this page here, we're rendering out, the shopping cart button, rendering out the shopping cart itself. We have this cart item component, which is that item up here within the cart itself. So we're looking at how do we pass props into components in Svelte 5, and then also being able to, handle two-way binding within each blocks and things like that. And then we also have the actual core content of the products, which is just a grid rendering at each product with its thumbnail, title, price, and then an add to cart button here. And so that's what makes up this entire page. Now our goal is to add functionality to this page. And I think the first thing that I want to do is get this cart out of my way. So the cart shouldn't just be open by default. We should be able to close it and open it, toggle it. You can see here we have this X, so we can actually click that to close it. But I think having the button toggle it, so if it's open, the button would close it and vice versa, would be a nice place to start. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up some state here. So I'm going to start with an cart open state. So we'll say cart open is going to be state, and by default, it's going to be false. Now here's the actual button that opens the cart. And so we'll kind of wrap the rest of this stuff within a conditional. So we'll say if cart open, then we want to show this. If not, then we don't. Okay. Now, if we check this out here, we'll see that we no longer actually see our cart. So on this button, we'll add an onClick handler to set cart open to the opposite of whatever it is at this point in time. So we'll just toggle it like so. Okay. So now we can actually toggle the cart and it all works great. We might as well, while we're here, go ahead and take care of that X button here. So we can be efficient here and say, close cart, and then have an onClick handler where we set cart open to false in this case. So we're not going to toggle it because of the fact that that's an X, right? That's close cart, toggle cart. Okay, so this is coming along nicely, right? We can see how the $state rune is able to react. We can simply just update that and our UI will reflect. And so the next thing we're going to do here is start to actually add these products to a cart. Okay, and to do that, we're going to need to have some type of list, an array of products that are actually in the cart. So we can say cart products, and this is going to be state, and it's going to be an array. Now the type for this, we could of course just update the product and add a quantity property to it. But in a realistic scenario here, we'd probably be getting this from our own database. We want to keep that pure, and then instead just have it as a property on a different object. So we'll have the type for cart product, and we should actually put this into our types file because we're going to reuse it in the cart item component. So we'll just call this cart product, and it's going to have a product. it's going to have a quantity, and then it's also going to have an ID. And we're going to leverage that ID to be able to actually remove this specific cart product from our cart. And we're just going to generate this on the client side, nothing too crazy. We could also use the product's ID, but again, I just want to kind of keep the cart product separate from the product itself, right? We just have product attached to this entity here. Okay, so we'll save that. And then now we can come back in here and import that type. And so now we have a reactive array of cart products. I need to import this as a type. Okay, so now down here inside of our products that we're rendering out, we have this add to cart button. So what we'll do here is we'll add an on-click handler, and we'll say cart products.push, and we're going to push an ID, which is going to be crypto.randomuid here. Just give us a random ID. We'll have quantity of 1 initially, and then we'll also add the product itself into that object. Okay, so now we are just pushing these products into the cart products once the user clicks on the add to cart button. So now what we have to do is we're only rendering one cart item at this point in time. And I used a component here on purpose. I'd like to cover snippets in a future video, potentially replacing this with a snippet, but I do want to show this component behavior as well in Svelte 5 because it is slightly different than Svelte 4. And you might run into some things that are kind of confusing. So hopefully I can clarify some of that for you all today. So right now we're only rendering that one, dummy product here. So let's just go ahead and say each cart items, or each, what do we call it? Cart products. Each cart products as cart product. And if we pass in cart product like this, it's going to give us an error here because we're not actually accepting any props. But if we go ahead and test this out here, we add to cart, we're going to see that we are in fact rendering one of these dummy products for every item that we add to the cart. So that part is working. So we are actually adding things to this cart products array, and our UI is updating to reflect that. So now we can go into this cart item component and we can set up some props. So with Svelte 5, I'm sure most of you might know. If not, you declare props with let and then $ props like this. So you have an object you destructure and then use the props rune to signal to the compiler, hey, these are my props. Now you can type them by adding the type here. I know some people prefer to do it inline like this, where we'd say cart product, but I always end up needing to move it into a separate type because it gets too messy. So I just end up doing this, setting a type up here or in another file if I'm going to be exporting it elsewhere. And I'll say cart product is going to be a cart product. And then here we'll type this as props, and then we'll pull cart product out of those props. Okay, so now that we have access to this cart product, we can start referencing it inside of the cart item. And I probably should have came up with better names for this. Again, we're probably going to be replacing this with a snippet in the future, maybe in a future video. But for now, we're just going to say cart product.product.title. Because remember, we have that product property that's holding the product of this cart product. I guess it could be cart entry. You guys get the point here. And then this is going to be cart product.product.price. And then this is going to be the quantity that we have in the cart. So there's 2 here. And then this is the minus button, and this is the plus button. So that's how we're going to increment and decrement the number of this specific product that we have in our cart from the cart itself. And then we also have the trash icon here, or trash button, which allows us to remove something from the cart. Okay, so for this quantity, we're just going to set this to cart product.quantity, just like so. And then for this source here, we'll set this to cart product.product.thumbnail. So it's using that same image that we see on the actual cart itself. And I think that's everything that we have to do here. So now when we come back to the page, if we refresh, we shouldn't have the cart open. It shouldn't be showing 2 there. We'll fix that here in a second. But if we start adding some things to the cart, add a couple colognes, some nail polish, maybe add a fish steak, head back up, we're going to see that we do in fact have all those items we added to the carts being rendered within our cart. Okay, so now let's go ahead and fix this quantity, and then we're going to look at how we can go about incrementing and decrementing the count of each one of these items within our cart from within that component. And that's why I'm using a component here, because it's a bit different, and I want to make sure that I cover that in this video. So back on our main page here, we have that 2. If we think about it, I'm not too sure if it should be the number of top level SKUs or whatever that we have in this cart, or if it should be the total of individual items. So if we had 4 items or 5 items here and we added 2 here, it would actually be 6. So maybe we'll do that. So we'll set up another reactive value. This one is going to be a derived. So we'll say cart quantity, and we'll have it be derived. And we're actually going to do derive.by because we're actually not going to use a reducer because reducers are really slow and I always feel bad when I use them. And we're basically going to iterate over each of the cart products and add up their quantities, right? So we'll have let total equals 0. And then for const product of cart products, we're going to add 1 to the product quantity and then return that total. So cart total now, or cart quantity, is derived from the cart products. So every time we update cart products, it's going to rerun this function here and update cart quantity. And then the UI that depends on that will also reflect. So here, if we instead replace this 2 with cart quantity, then we go back, we're going to see that we're at 0. And probably better UX would be to just not show anything there and then show it. But for now, we're fine. So let's start adding some things to the cart. We'll see that it does in fact react to those updates. Okay, cool. So now what we want to do is be able to actually increment and decrement the quantities within the cart itself. And so your first instinct might be to come into the cart item component here. We'll grab this button. We'll say on click. This is the plus button. So on click, cart product dot quantity plus plus. And then for the minus button, we'll do the same thing, except subtract. Right? We have a reference to the object. Everything would make sense if this would be okay to do. So let's refresh and get a fresh start. We'll add a couple of things to the cart, and then we'll start incrementing those items. And sure enough, it does in fact work. But if we check our console here, we're going to see Svelte is not very happy with us. So for one, I'm using the wrong fetch in my load function. It doesn't matter in this specific case, but I should update that. But here's the one I care about is ownership invalid mutation. So it's telling us that cart item.svelte mutated a value owned by the page. This is strongly discouraged. Consider passing values to child components with bind or use a callback instead. Now, the reason for this issue or the reason for this message, I've had my own personal beef with it too, so maybe it's confusing to you as well. But ultimately, now that we're using signals and these reactive objects that can just be passed as props, that means any library, any component library, anything could just update your state without you explicitly telling them that they can do so, right? Because this is a deeply reactive array of cart products, which are all proxied objects. At the moment, there's no way for us to say, hey, like, don't mutate this, or hey, this is only read-only, right? Because it only exists in one place. So Svelte forces us to use the bind keyword to say, hey, I'm allowing cart item to mutate cart product on my behalf and update the state here in this plus page. So in state that the page owns, I'm allowing cart item to update. So your instinct might be after seeing that message to come down here and say bind cart product. Okay, shut up, be done with it. But unfortunately, we get another little error here. That's letting us know we cannot reassign or bind to each block argument in runes mode. Now, why this is, I'm not 100% sure. I'm sure there's a perfectly valid and really difficult technical problem that forces this to be the case, because otherwise they would clearly want to do this. But in this situation here, we actually have to kind of do a workaround. So we have to use the index of this array rather than using this cart product itself. So to do that, I'm just going to use an underscore here to say, hey, we're not using the cart product from this part of the array, but I do want the index. Okay. And so now I'm going to bind cart product equals cart products at that specific index. And now we're going to see another little squiggly. And that's because we haven't actually told the cart item component that this prop is bindable. And so we're being more explicit here, which I actually prefer. So we have to come through here and say bindable. And that lets us know, that's how we can indicate to consumers of this component that, hey, you can bind to this prop. Or, hey, you can't bind to this prop. If you do, we're not going to do anything with it. And so that's how we can indicate that here is we use this bindable rune like so. So now all of our little errors have went away. We come back into our browser, refresh the page. I'm getting that, still getting that message about the fetch. Let me just fix that so it doesn't pollute our console. Now we'll refresh. We don't get any error messages here. Let's go ahead and try to add some things to the cart. We'll go back into our cart and then we'll mutate them. And sure enough, it is in fact reflecting the state updates because remember, the cart quantity is being computed in the page and we're mutating these down in the cart item. So it is propagating those state changes up, and we're not getting any error messages, which is great. Okay, so that covers the bind part. Now, if you remember, that error message said something about a callback, right? What are they referring to? They're referring to basically passing a function down that is in charge of updating the state. So you declare that function here within this component that owns that state, and you pass that function down to be invoked, but all the state mutation is still happening within this component. And the perfect time to demonstrate that is now, because we want to actually delete this item from this cart products array, right? And right now, cart item doesn't have a reference to the array itself. It just has a reference to that specific object in the array. And so we'll need to leverage a callback here. We can just simply set up a function called remove item, remove from cart. It's going to take in an ID, which can be a string, and then we'll set cart products equal to cart products.filter product. And so basically, we're just going to filter out that single product from the array whenever this function is called. Okay. And so now for this cart item to actually be able to use this, we need to pass it as a prop. So let's go back into our cart item and set up a remove item function. It's going to take in an ID of a string, and it's going to return nothing. Now, in this case, this doesn't need to be bindable because it's not mutating any state. Now, technically, the result of this function will actually mutate state, but the mutation is happening in the owner of the state component, which is this page. Hope that makes sense. I'm not trying to be too confusing here, but I want to make sure I explain it in a way that isn't treating you like a little kid. Okay, so remove item, we have this function now. So on our button here, trash button, we'll say on click, remove item, and we'll pass in product or cart product.id. Okay, so now we have this callback being executed here. Now you could have done the same thing with the update. So rather than going through the process of binding, we could have just said update item, give it an ID, and then also like the new item. So when you call that function, it would then update the item in that array on your behalf. But there's a couple different ways you can do this. They give you the flexibility to do so. So our linter is yelling at us now because we haven't passed that function down. So let's go ahead and do that. Remove item equals remove from cart. Okay, so let's go ahead and test this out, see if everything works. We're going to add a few things to the cart. We'll come in here, and then we're simply going to delete it, and it's going to remove it from the cart. Now, another instance when we want to remove it from the cart is if they knock the quantity down to 0. At least in my head, that means like, hey, I don't want this. I suppose we could also disable this button, but let's just be cool here. When they drop it to 0, we're just going to drop it from the cart. In our cart item component, rather than just straight up minusing here, we're going to run a conditional. So if cart product.quantity is equal to 1, then we're going to remove item cart product.id, else cart product.quantity minus. Okay. So if the cart product quantity is currently at 1 and they're trying to decrement it, that means they're going to 0, which means we're going to remove the item from the cart. Otherwise, we're just going to do like we would normally do and drop 1 from the quantity. So now if we head back over here, we refresh the page, we add a few different things to the cart, and we remove this one. We'll see that it does in fact just disappear. I'm not too sure if that's great UX or not, but it is functional. So now we increment, we decrement, we can delete, everything is updating except the total. So we haven't gotten to that part yet, so let's go ahead and get to that. And that's going to be in our plus page. So if we think about what we need for the total, we basically need every product that we have in our cart products. We need to multiply the price of that product by the quantity of that product and then add all of those up. And so we could, of course, set up another derive statement here and iterate over the products again. But since we're already iterating over the products anyways, and we're already looping through each one of them and summing up the total, we might as well just get both values from this within this single derive. So we'll rename this to cart stats. And we'll have quantity. And then we'll also have total, I guess, right? So total and quantity. So quantity is going to be this. Total is going to be, we're going to add the price times that product's quantity, just like Copilot is suggesting here, to the total. And then we'll just return quantity and total, just like this. Okay. So now we can go down here wherever we were using card stats. So for the total, we'll make this quantity. I'm not really too sure about the total price. Maybe I should call it total price, but for now we're just going to leave it at total. And then for total here, we'll say cart stats.total. Now, if we go ahead and increment these counts, we're going to see that our total is in fact working. And if we open up the cart, we scroll down a bit, we're going to see that we're getting some really long number, and we can fix that really easily by just adding .toFixed to the end of this with 2. That'll give us just 2 decimal place number. And so now if we add some stuff to the cart, check it out, we're going to get 177.96. We remove something, we're going to see that it is in fact updating. All of these various states are all staying in sync. And that's really the power of the derived. And so the next thing I want to cover today is effect. And we're going to talk about it just briefly here, but I'm going to show you an example of a good way to use an effect and an example of a bad way to use an effect. So effect is for running side effects in response to some other reactive state, right? So it does automatic dependency tracking, allows you to opt out of dependency tracking altogether, and a lot of cool stuff. But it's really easy to run into traps with it if you're using it the wrong way. So let's say in this case, a side effect that we want to show is that if the user gets to over $50 in their cart, we want to show an alert saying, hey, you qualify for free shipping, okay? So you might think, let's just go in here and say effect, and we'll say if cart stats.total is greater than or equal to 50, we want to show an alert that says you have qualified for free shipping. This seems completely reasonable. So now let's go back into our application and let's get to over $50. So add this for $49.99. We add this. We now have over $50 and we got that alert. Now the problem right now is that, I don't want this to keep happening. I just want it to happen one time, right? So I want it to be a one-time effect that only runs when they hit over $50. If they drop below 50, we want it to re-trigger again when they go back above 50. Now, again, this probably wouldn't be an alert. Maybe it's a toast or something else that you have somewhere else on the screen. And maybe you could handle this with a derived and conditional rendering. But in this case, we're actually talking about a side effect we want to produce here. And so the problem here is that this effect is tracking the card stats.total, which is changing every single time we update or add something to the cart. So instead, if we head here and say qualifies for free shipping, and we make this a derived, this is what I'm talking about when I say that you should be reaching for derived a lot more than you reach for an effect. So in this case, we'll say card stats.total is greater than or equal to 50. Okay. Now, what's really cool about this is that now it's tracking this value, right? So once we go above 50, that value doesn't change anymore. Even if we add more stuff, it's going to reevaluate this expression. It didn't change. So therefore, it's not going to re-trigger the effect. So if we come back down here and we say qualifies for free shipping, now we head back into our application. We add a couple things. We're going to get the message once. But then as we add things to the cart, we're not going to keep getting that alert over and over again, because rather than tracking .total of the card stats object, it's tracking this. And since this evaluates to true once and hasn't changed, it knows that, and it's not going to keep on refiring this effect. Now, if we were to go ahead and delete a bunch of things from the cart and then re-add them, you'll see that since that state did change, since we stopped qualifying for free shipping and then we qualified again, of course, it's going to re-trigger the side effect. That's the expected behavior. If you want it to only happen once, you could just have let free shipping alert counts equals 0. And then once we have the alert, we'll say free shipping alert count ++, and then only trigger this effect if free shipping alert count is truthy, or if it's over 0. You could do if it's greater than 0, we're going to return. Be specific here. And so now, once we go over it, we're going to get it once. But then once we go back under 50 and then go back above 50, it's not going to re-trigger it. So these are things to think about when you're working with effects: is look at what your effect depends on. Make sure that is like the most precise thing that it could depend on. The more broad you are, the more difficult it's going to be to track down what's causing this thing to keep re-triggering over and over again. Okay, so I think that's going to conclude this specific video. I think we added all the functionality that we want to add for this beginning step. If you all like this video, I'd love to make additional videos on this same kind of concept here. We can add filters, we can add search, we can add pagination. There's a lot of things that we can do with this, and I would love to kind of keep expanding on this nice baseline that we have here. But if you all are interested in that, let me know in the comments down below. I'm more than happy to do so. Thank you all so much for tuning in and watching. I hope that you learned something today, and I will see you in the next one.